My name is Thomas Dervis II. I am the Florida Sea Grant agent for Santa Rosa County, Florida.
Global oyster populations have seen an 85% decline over the past 200 years. Why do you think their populations have been so significantly impacted?
A lot of it, not a lot of it, I would attribute some of it to oyster harvesting. There was times where there wasn't really much regulation in terms of oyster harvesting. A lot of it is climate change in terms of so my favorite example is Apalachicola. Everybody loves an Apalachicola oyster. That's what everybody talks about. They've been closed for 3 or 4 years now, and it's because of the water quality that has changed in the area. Uh, Oysters surprisingly don't like a hypersalinity water. They love it to be brackish, about 15 parts per thousand, all the way up to like 28, even maybe a little lower. That's their favorite range to be in. Apalachicola. So there's this thing going on with the water wars between Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. The northern states won, so they were able to keep a lot of the water. A lot of that water was flowing into the Chattahoochee, which then flew into the Apalachicola. So we've gotten a hypersaline environment in an Apalachicola, and that has kind of devastated the oyster populations. Same can be said for a lot of different places that are going through oyster declines, especially here in Pensacola. We've had a lot of fresh water, which is completely different than what Apalachicola is going through. And the fresh water really does damage the oysters. Um, a lot of it definitely has to be with either climate change or the changing of the hydrology of the area.
What makes it like a toxic algae bloom versus just like a normal one?
It's just the species. So Carania brevis is the red tide flagellate, dinoflagellate, and it will produce a toxic chemical that not only gets released into the water, but it also gets released into the air. We do have helpful algae out there. I'm drawing a blank on the names, but they do help the environment. So algae is actually a really cool organism that a lot of people don't realize produces most of the oxygen for the earth. Algae produces a heavy amount of oxygen even compared to the trees that we have. So having algae out in the water isn't a bad thing always, but having it controlled is always better. There's this thing called eutrophication, which you've probably heard of. It's a big word, big fancy word, just meaning that the water is really cloudy and the light can't penetrate through that. Doesn't seem like it's a big issue, but when you think about eutrophication happening around seagrass beds and stuff like that, it will block seagrasses from being able to consume sunlight to be able to do photosynthesis. So that's another big thing that we're working with. And algae plays a part in the eutrophication process. So.
Yeah. Do you know any of like the challenges of like this oyster restoration project, or like anything kind of issues that you kind of came across?
Money. Money is the biggest issue. A lot of people see Sea Grant stuff like that and think that we have the ability to give out grants. In fact, the word Sea Grant just means that we're funded from a land grant university. So it's University of Florida in cooperation with FAMU, Florida Agricultural Mechanical University over in Tallahassee. That was a hard one. But we work with them, and the hardest thing that we found is getting the money and the funds for it. Everybody's obviously fighting for funds every year for things. And something on this kind of scale is massive. Like I said recently, that the estuary program has an $11 million grant to do oyster restoration. And that really is kind of just a drop in the bucket for what we could do with this area to bring this area back to its former glory.
And what are some of the accomplishments that you guys have seen from these kind of projects?
Well, this is just looking at this. This is a great accomplishment. There used to be no little spoil islands here. It used to be nothing but water. Now you've got a great little breakwater that's being filled with oysters. You've got these little islands here that can, shorebirds can nest on and hang out on. You've got an increase in wildlife in the area, a lot of fish and stuff like that, biodiversity. We've actually got a study going on right now through Dolphin Island Sea Lab, doing a study on the recruitment of juvenile and adult fish in this area. So hopefully that's a good result. I think it's going to be a great result. Cleaner waters have been a thing. I can't say that it's directly attributed to everything that we've been doing here, but this past year we've had some really clean waters. We haven't had a lot of health advisories, which is a great thing. Hopefully a lot of people are starting to become more aware, but I would also like to attribute it to the oysters because they're great filter feeders and they're great powerhouses for storing a bunch of stuff that we don't want in our waters. But in terms of successes, I mean, this is one of the biggest successes for me, just seeing this. I know this isn't just oyster reefs, but it's a whole environment that we've kind of created to help enhance the wildlife in the area.
How do you know if the oysters are healthy? Does that matter? Are they still helping the environment even if we can't eat them?
Yes. It's just mainly because if I'm saying you can't harvest it, it's just because it's in a closed area. What that means is that there's usually some kind of pollutants, or it's around a place of a lot of residential access, a lot of residential areas, just because of runoff. Runoff is one of the biggest issues we have, especially here in Florida. We're now one of the wettest areas in the United States of America, even compared to Seattle. So a lot of that water, you have a lot of runoff. With the runoff, you could have, chemicals, you could have fertilizers, you could have feces, for that matter, animal feces, which is something they try to control. So the Department of Agriculture will come out and test the waters. They'll test it, weekly or bi-weekly, and they're testing for a bacteria that could be indicated that the presence of feces is in the water. It does not mean that there is feces in the water. It just means that it could possibly be in the water. And so even the reason why these are closed is because they haven't gotten a lot of testing done. They haven't done a lot of monitoring. Like for the Big Lagoon, there wasn't 5 years worth of data for them to look at. So now that they've been doing it for, I think they're on year 4, after year 5, they should be able to say, yes, it's good to go, or no, it's bad to go. Recently, the boundary up in East Bay was changed. So it excluded a portion of the northern part of the East Bay. And that actually created a better environment for the farmers. They've actually been open a lot more. They actually just got closed because of this rain we had. But before that, they had not been closed since June or July of last year. So that was incredible. Usually when I was an oyster farmer back in the day, we were closed almost half the year. So.
Wow. And that's just because of having to be shut down for the water testing? The
water testing, it was always testing positive in that area for the coliform bacteria. And once they excluded that area and said it was prohibited, they're getting clean tests from the farms. And now they're even testing on the oyster farms, which is great. So.
Let's see.
But let me answer that question a little bit more. Sorry, I just remembered what the question was. No matter if they're in a prohibited zone or not, they're going to filter just as much. And to be able to tell if it's a healthy oyster or not, it's really hard to do that. I've been on an oyster farm where we lost 100% of our oysters, but they still looked beautiful and pretty. However, there was some kind of environmental condition that just kicked them. But definitely, it doesn't matter if they're in an open or closed area, they're still going to filter a lot of water.
And then, how did you get into oyster farming?
So my true love was actually finfish. I went to Auburn University and did my master's in aquaculture. My research was on Florida pompano reproduction. And so I was at Claude Petit Mariculture Center, which is over in Gulf Shores, and I was doing research on Florida pompano. One of my colleagues at the time was going through a couple of oyster farming classes, and she was like, hey, you might be interested in this. So I got invited to one of the oyster farming classes, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is kind of cool. Was offered a job with Pensacola Bay Oyster Company, being their farm manager. I was hoping just to bridge the gap between me and my career that I was hoping to choose. However, I fell in love with it. I was out on the farm almost every day. I wasn't really the biggest oyster fan. I used to eat them when I was younger. But once I started growing them and everything, I just fell in love with the oysters, how they do everything, filtering the bays, filtering everything, sequestering carbon. They're just incredible organisms. I used to call them rocks with meat in them. Now I have a different look at them as a great little environmental buddy that also tastes really good and is really beneficial for a lot of people.
Definitely an underrated meat rock.
Yes.
That was going to be one of my questions, is if you like to eat oysters, and if so, what's your favorite way?
So yeah, I like to eat oysters. I'm not a raw I will eat raws. So I just got back from the Oyster South Symposium, which was in New Orleans. It was a great event. There was a shuck and tell where they had a bunch of oyster farmers from around the area. And so I consumed almost every oyster from every area raw. It was great. However, if you're going to look at me and say, how would you like your oysters? Put them on the grill, give me some Cajun butter, or give me some black garlic compound butter. I don't even need a cracker at that point. I can just throw it on the grill and then slurp it right out of the shell. So,
do you have any advice for like UWF students currently going through the marine biology program and like maybe finding work afterwards?
Yes, I have a lot of advice. Stay with it. Don't get too discouraged about things. The job market can be difficult. One of the things that I tell people, I have actually a couple family members that went through marine biology school, and they had the same problem I did. When I got out of my master's program, I applied to over 100 jobs. I had over 90 letters of, sorry, you're not chosen for this job. I didn't let that deter me. I kept going. I found a great position at Alabama, and my life turned around when I got the job offer for Pensacola Bay. Definitely just keep your nose down, keep grinding, keep doing what you can. The greatest thing, though, is that it seems like nowadays there's a lot more emphasis on the waterways and marine biology and stuff like that, whereas back in the day it was kind of, oh, it's just the Gulf of Mexico, just let it be, it'll fix itself. I've noticed a lot of good positions popping up. Don't be afraid to do something that's out of your comfort zone. That's what I did with the oysters. I wasn't really into oysters at the beginning. I loved finfish. I mean, I did everything from pompano, trout, redfish, snook. But when I went and did the oysters, I fell in love with it, which is something that you wouldn't be able to do if you said, oh, I don't want to work with, let's say, salmon or something like that. I even applied to a job up in Alaska. I was like, shoot, I'll just go to Alaska and work with salmon. So just, keep it going. It's a great field to be in. It can be very rewarding, but it can also be very stressful at the same time. The waters don't listen to us. Mother Nature does not listen to what we do. It does not care if we're going out sampling at 4 o'clock in the morning and it's blowing 50 miles an hour. She does not care. She's not going to give up anything. So, keep your will with you, keep going, and just keep with it. That's my biggest thing, is that, don't get too discouraged. Just keep going. Support your local farmers, support your local oyster industry people. If you really want to see local oysters on menus around here, just ask them, hey, why don't you have a local oyster on your menu? We actually have a local restaurant here that's the reason why they have local oysters on the menus, because they had so much demand from the customers. So just, if that's something that you want to see on your menus, keep it up. And definitely just support your oyster farmers and support this beautiful habitat that we have here.
Can you spill the beans? Where can we eat to get the local oysters?
So Atlas actually has some local oysters. Harry Roy is a private club. If you're lucky enough to get in there, they have local oysters as well. Grand Marlin has local oysters, and we're actually I'm not. I'm helping promote them, but a couple oyster farmers have gotten contacts from a couple restaurants locally, and they're trying to work out the logistics to get in there. Salty Pearl is one of them. And I'm drawing a blank on the other one. Pearl and Horn doesn't have a local oyster per se, but they do have murder points, which are from Alabama, which are pretty close. But yeah, if you go to any restaurant and you see oysters and they don't have local, and say, hey, let's get some local oysters in here.
Heard that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.